My name is Clara. I am 27 years old now, but this story begins many years ago when I was only 18. At that time, I had just finished high school and was ready to start university. I lived in a small town where everyone knew each other and life was quiet and simple. I had never been in love before. I often imagined what it would feel like to have someone look at you as if you were the only person in the world. I didn't know then that this feeling would come into my life suddenly and it would change me forever. It happened in the summer before I moved to the city for my studies. My best friend, Sophie, invited me to a local festival. The park was full of music, laughter, and the smell of food from small stalls. I was walking beside Sophie, enjoying the warm evening, when she stopped to greet someone. That was the first time I saw Daniel. He was standing next to her cousin, holding a guitar in his hands. His hair was a little messy, and his smile was warm, the kind that made you feel comfortable right away. Sophie introduced us, and Daniel said, "Hi, Clara. I've heard a lot about you." His voice was calm and friendly. I felt my cheeks grow warm. We talked for a while, and I learned that he was a year older than me and played in a small local band. He loved music, reading, and long walks, things I enjoyed too. That night, after the festival ended, we all walked home together. Daniel and I walked a little slower than the rest, talking about our dreams and favorite books. Something about him felt different from anyone I had met before. Over the next few weeks, we met more often. Sometimes we went for ice cream, sometimes we sat by the river and talked for hours. Daniel had a way of listening that made me feel important. He remembered every small detail I told him, my favorite color, my fear of thunderstorms, even the way I liked my tea. Slowly, my feelings for him grew, though I didn't dare say it out loud. I didn't know if he felt the same. One evening, we met at the park just before sunset. The air was warm, and the sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. We sat on a bench, watching the light reflect on the water. Daniel turned to me and said quietly, "Clara, I think I like you more than just a friend." My heart raced. I wanted to smile and cry at the same time. I had dreamed of this moment, and now it was real. I told him I liked him too, and he smiled in a way that I will never forget. That was the beginning of my first love. That summer felt magical. Every day with Daniel was full of laughter and small adventures. We went to the market together, tried new foods, and even got caught in the rain once, laughing as we ran for shelter. I began to believe that maybe this was the kind of love that would last forever. But in the back of my mind, I knew that summer was not endless. I was moving to the city in September, and Daniel was staying in our town to work and save money. We didn't talk about it much, perhaps because we were afraid of what it might mean. As the days passed, the thought of leaving started to feel heavier. I tried to enjoy every moment, but sometimes, when I looked at Daniel, I felt a quiet sadness. I wondered if distance would change us. He must have felt the same, because one evening, while we were sitting by the river, he said, "I don't want this to end, Clara. But I don't know what will happen when you leave." I didn't know either. I told him we would try, that we could call and visit each other, and he agreed. Still, there was a small shadow of worry in his eyes. The last week of summer arrived faster than I expected. Each day felt more precious than the one before. We promised ourselves that no matter what happened, we would always remember this summer. On my final night in town before leaving for university, Daniel walked me home. At my gate, he held my hand for a long time, as if letting go would break something between us. "I'll miss you," he said softly. I whispered the same words back. When he hugged me, I felt like I wanted to stay in that moment forever. The next morning, I left for the city. As the bus drove away, I saw Daniel standing on the side of the road, his hands in his pockets, watching until I disappeared from view. I pressed my forehead against the window, trying not to cry. I told myself that this was just the beginning of our story, but deep inside, I didn't know how much life was about to change for both of us. The city felt enormous compared to my quiet hometown. Tall buildings stood side by side, the streets were crowded with cars, and there was a constant noise that I wasn't used to. My small apartment was on the 4th floor of an old building, with a view of another wall just across the street. It was nothing like the open skies and quiet nights I knew. For the first few days, I felt both excited and lost. I kept telling myself that this was an adventure, a chance to learn, to grow, to become the person I wanted to be. Daniel and I talked every day at first. He would call me in the evening, and we would tell each other about our day. I told him about my classes, the busy streets, and the new people I met. He told me about his work at the local repair shop, the new songs he was learning on guitar, and the way our town looked in early autumn. His voice was like a piece of home, and I would smile just hearing it. But as the weeks passed, our calls started to get shorter. Sometimes Daniel would be busy, or I would be too tired after a long day. I told myself it was normal. Life was different now for both of us. Still, I noticed that I missed him more than ever. When I walked through the city park, I thought about our river back home. When I heard music playing in a cafe, I imagined Daniel playing his guitar. It was as if he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. One Friday evening, a few friends from my class invited me to a small music night at a local cafe. The place was warm and full of soft yellow light, and a young man was playing guitar near the corner. His music was beautiful, but it made me ache inside because it reminded me of Daniel. After the show, my friends introduced me to him. His name was Alex. He was friendly, confident, and made everyone laugh. I liked talking to him, but the whole time I kept thinking about Daniel, wondering what he was doing at that very moment. That night, Daniel didn't call. I waited until it was late, then finally sent him a message. Hours passed with no reply. The next morning, he finally wrote back, saying he had fallen asleep early after a long day at work. I believed him, but there was a small sting in my chest. I wondered if he missed me the way I missed him. By the second month, our calls were down to twice a week. Sometimes, we didn't talk at all for several days. I started to get used to my new life. My classes were interesting. I joined a study group, and I found a favorite cafe where I liked to read. But even with all these changes, I carried Daniel with me in my thoughts. Whenever I saw couples walking hand in hand, I felt an ache deep inside. One weekend, I returned to my hometown to visit my parents. Daniel and I had planned to spend the whole Saturday together. I was so excited that I could hardly sleep the night before. But on Saturday morning, he called to say he had to work unexpectedly because his boss was short on staff. I tried to hide my disappointment and told him it was okay. I spent the day walking around town alone, passing all the places we used to go. Without him, everything felt different. That evening, Daniel came by my house after work. He looked tired, his hair messy from the long day, but when he smiled at me, my heart softened. We sat in my backyard, talking about little things, avoiding the big questions. I wanted to ask him if he thought we could last like this, but the words stayed in my throat. It was easier to pretend everything was fine. Back in the city, time kept moving forward. My exams approached, and I buried myself in studying. Daniel and I exchanged short messages, but sometimes a whole day passed without either of us saying anything. Then, one afternoon, Sophie called me. She sounded hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether to speak. Finally, she said, "Clara, I think you should know something about Daniel." My stomach turned cold. She told me she had seen him at the cafe in town, sitting with a girl she didn't recognize. They were laughing together, leaning in close. I didn't know what to say. My mind filled with questions. Who was she? Why didn't he tell me? Was I overreacting? I thanked Sophie for telling me, but after we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I told myself it could be nothing. Maybe she was just a friend. But a part of me knew that something had shifted between us. That night, Daniel called. His voice was cheerful, as if nothing was wrong. I tried to sound normal, too, but inside, I felt a strange mix of fear and sadness. I didn't mention Sophie's call. Instead, I listened to him talk about his day, smiling at the sound of his voice, but wondering if I was still the only girl he looked at that way. The days after Sophie's call felt heavier. I tried to focus on my classes and friends, but my mind kept wandering back to Daniel. I replayed every moment of our last conversations, searching for signs I had missed. Had he sounded different? Had he been more distant? I didn't want to believe that anything had changed, but deep down, I felt a quiet unease that I couldn't ignore. One evening, I decided I couldn't live in doubt any longer. I called Daniel and asked if we could talk. He agreed, and we decided to meet in my hometown the following weekend. As the train carried me back, I stared out of the window, my heart beating fast. I didn't know if I wanted the truth or if I was afraid of what it might do to us. When I arrived, Daniel was waiting at the small station. He smiled, but it was not the same warm smile I remembered from that summer. There was something guarded in his eyes, as if he knew this conversation was coming. We walked to the park and sat on the same bench where he had first told me he liked me. The air was cool, and the autumn leaves crunched under our shoes. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Sophie told me she saw you with someone at the cafe." I tried to keep my tone calm, but my hands were cold. Daniel looked down for a moment, then met my eyes. "Clara, she's just a friend," he said quickly. "We were catching up. It's nothing." His words were smooth, but I noticed he didn't smile when he said them. I wanted to believe him, and maybe a part of me did. But another part held on to the image Sophie had described, the way they were leaning close, laughing together. I didn't push him further that day. Instead, we talked about other things, avoiding the silence that seemed to be growing between us. When he walked me back to my parents' house, I hugged him tightly, trying to remember how it felt to be sure of us. Back in the city, our conversations became less frequent again. Weeks passed, and I could feel the gap between us widening. One night, While studying, I got a message from Daniel. It was short. "We need to talk." My heart sank. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. The next day, he finally replied, asking if we could meet the following weekend. His tone in the messages was polite, almost formal, and it made me uneasy. That Saturday, I met him at the same park again. The day was gray, the sky heavy with clouds. Daniel didn't waste time with small talk. "Clara," he said, "I don't think we can keep doing this." The words hit me like a wave. I stared at him, feeling the world tilt slightly. "Why?" I asked, my voice quiet. He looked away. "It's not just the distance," he said. "I've been spending time with someone here. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I don't think it's fair to you." His words were steady, but I could see the guilt in his face. My chest felt tight, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. This was the truth I had been afraid of, and now it was here, unshakable and cold. I wanted to shout, to ask why he didn't fight for us, but instead I just sat there. "So that's it?" I said finally. Daniel nodded, his eyes soft. "I'll always care about you, Clara. You're special to me, but I think this is the best thing for both of us." The walk back to my parents' house felt endless. Daniel offered to walk me all the way, but I told him I needed to be alone. When I finally reached home, I went straight to my old bedroom, closed the door, and let the tears come. They were heavy and silent at first, then loud and shaking. I pressed my face into the pillow, trying to muffle the sound. That night, I thought about the summer we had shared, the laughter, the river, the sunsets. It felt like a lifetime ago. I realized that my first love had ended not with a big fight, but with a quiet goodbye on a gray afternoon. The boy who had once made me believe in forever was now just a memory I would carry. Over the next week, I moved through my life in the city like a shadow. I went to class, smiled when I needed to, but inside, I felt hollow. Friends invited me out, but I often said no. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to hear the usual words, "You'll be okay," or "You'll find someone else." My heart was still too full of Daniel. One evening, I took a long walk by the city river. The lights from the buildings reflected on the water, and the air was cool against my face. I remembered the way Daniel and I had sat by our hometown river, watching the sunset. I realized that I couldn't go back to that time, no matter how much I wanted to. My first love had ended, and now it was time to learn how to live without it. Winter arrived in the city, and with it came a quiet stillness. The streets were lined with lights, and shop windows were full of decorations. But I didn't feel the excitement I used to. My mind still wandered back to Daniel more often than I wanted it to. I thought about calling him sometimes, but then I would remember our last conversation and stop myself. I knew that even if we spoke again, it would never be the same. Slowly, I began to return to the rhythm of my own life. I threw myself into my studies, spending extra hours at the library. I joined a weekend art class, something I had always wanted to try but never found time for before. There, I met people who shared my interests, and our conversations were light and free from the weight of the past. For the first time in months, I found myself laughing without forcing it. Still, healing was not a straight path. There were days when I felt strong and hopeful, and others when I missed Daniel so much it hurt. I would hear a song that reminded me of him or see a couple holding hands, and the ache would return. But each time, it faded a little faster. I began to understand that missing someone doesn't mean you should be with them. It just means they were important to you. One Saturday, Sophie came to visit me in the city. We sat in my favorite cafe, drinking tea as snow fell softly outside. She asked how I was doing, and I told her the truth. Better. Not completely fine, but better. She smiled and said she was proud of me. First loves are special, Clara, she said, but they're not always the ones we end up with. That doesn't make them less real. Her words stayed with me long after she left. As the months passed, I noticed a change in myself. I no longer checked my phone waiting for Daniel's messages. I stopped looking for him in the faces of strangers. I even stopped avoiding the songs he used to play on his guitar. Instead, I let them be part of my story, a reminder of a time when I had loved fully, even if it hadn't lasted. Spring came, and with it, a sense of new beginnings. One warm afternoon, I decided to visit my hometown for the first time in a while. The streets looked the same, but I felt different walking through them. I passed the park where Daniel and I had first talked, the cafe where we had shared ice cream, and the river where we had promised to stay together. Instead of pain, I felt a quiet gratitude. Those moments had shaped me, and without them, I wouldn't be who I was now. While walking back to my parents' house, I saw Daniel across the street. He was with the same girl Sophie had once mentioned. They were holding hands, talking quietly. For a moment, our eyes met. He gave me a small smile, not the smile of summer, but a polite one, full of unspoken understanding. I smiled back, then kept walking. There was no anger left in me, only a sense of closure. That evening, I sat in my old bedroom and looked out of the window at the stars. I thought about how much I had changed in the past year. My first love had taught me how beautiful it is to connect deeply with someone, but it had also taught me that love alone is not always enough to keep two people together. And that was okay. When I returned to the city, I felt lighter. I knew that life would bring new people, new experiences, and perhaps new love. But I also knew that my first love would always have a special place in my heart, not because it lasted, but because it was the first time I truly opened myself to someone else. Now, when I walk along the river in the city, I no longer feel the ache I once did. Instead, I smile, remembering that young girl by the water with the boy who played guitar. That chapter of my life had ended, but it was part of my story, and it always would be. And as I look toward the future, I know I am ready for whatever comes next.